Jane Henrici is an applied anthropologist who has decades of experience working in development and gender organizations on disasters. She's had consulting arrangements with agencies such as the World Bank, the United Nations, and she teaches at multiple universities, including the Elliott School at George Washington University. So Jane, please do the honor of introducing our speaker.
Thank you, Mark. So yes, I have the pleasure of introducing Mayssoun Sukarieh, who is reader in the Department of International Development at King's College in London. So Dr. Sukarieh conducted long-term ethnographic research with NGOs in the cities of Amman, Dubai, and Washington, D.C. for her 2023 book, published by Cornell, A Global Idea, Youth, City Networks, and the Struggle for the Arab World. And Mayssoun continues to examine social and cultural transformations and neoliberalism in the Middle East. So welcome, and we look forward to hearing you, and lots of questions, I'm sure, for you.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Jane, for having me with you today, and thank you all for joining on Zoom. I really look forward to our conversation. I'm not much of a book talker, so I thought like it will be a great conversation for us to explore different ideas of the book. I wasn't sure what angle to take in presenting the book to you in 20, 30 minutes or so. So I know you might have read the book or part of it. So I thought instead of a repeat, it might be helpful to discuss the story of the book itself, the process of the research, and the different shifts in my thinking about it. I thought it would be helpful to demystify the process of how we formulate ideas, how we write, how we produce, and how the field plays a role in shaping the process of research, not only for researchers, and you are researchers now and maybe future academics and researchers, but also like for us as global citizens. It's really important to think about these processes of how ideas are formed and transformed. So I hope this will be helpful. Since it's a talk in cooperation with the Center of Nonprofit and NGO Studies, and thank you, Mark, I will tell the story with an NGO lens. So after all, the book follows two NGOs, the Junior Achievement, JA, and Education for Employment Foundation, EFE, from Washington to DC to Amman, Dubai, and other places in the Arab world, and details their relation to what I call the Youth Development Complex. So in doing so, I detail the network and infrastructure of these NGOs with the private sector, the governments in different levels, universities, funders, among other actors. So let's start with the idea of the book itself. So I started the book as my PhD dissertation. It was focused mainly on the winning hearts and minds of Muslim youth. You are too young to remember that, but it was a State Department project that was launched after 9/11 and continued till 2010. So the project was kind of a replica of the Cold War Winning Hearts and Minds project to combat communism, except here the idea is to combat terrorism. It basically focused on targeting young Muslims through media, Radio Sawa and High Magazine, workshops, funds, training, as well as scholarships to Muslim youth to study in the USA or visit to Washington, D.C. The project made me think about public and cultural diplomacy, how they work, what are the projects, and who is executing them on the ground. Through the process, however, I discovered that the old scholarship on public diplomacy won't help to analyze the current Winning Hearts and Minds project. Winning Hearts and Minds State Department project were the tipping point for a much deeper, multi-pronged project that surpassed the US State Department and included the private sector, civil society actors. So the dissertation focused on this, basically on this, the infrastructure of the whole Winning Hearts and Minds that is not about winning hearts and minds through what I call the youth development complex. So, and since the project was a State Department project, it was normal to start the process of data collection in DC. The death of history ceases and the triumph of capitalism were still dominant. The globalization literature and the rollback of the state were abound in academia. Slowly, it was clearer that DC offered a clear, close case of how the state, the private sector, and the third sector or civil society were working together. And I immediately discovered that focusing on the State Department project is not sufficient, and it will tell only the tip of the story. I slowly discovered that there are so many NGOs who are involved in the project. Public diplomacy has been somehow privatized. When reading more, I decided to focus on the two NGOs, the Junior Achievement and Education for Employment Foundation, and through them tell the story of the spread of the ideology of the market, but also the spread of the idea of youth as an idea. So when I'm in DC, I stayed on N Street. If you know DC, I'm sure many of you know that. N Street is close to K Street, where most of the lobbying happens. So K Street is the street of the lobbying organization or the lobbies. I immediately discovered that I didn't need to commute and I can reach on foot all the meetings, my interviews, the workshops on youth. They all were around K Street and DuPont Circle. It wasn't much effort to be able to get access to interviews. K Street and DuPont Circle hosted all events, think tanks, lobbying groups, NGOs. It was easy enough to sit in cafes, go to conferences and workshops around, and to approach interviews. It was easy for me to mingle. After all, I was a good Arab, one of them. Surely I was not against democracy promotion. And democracy promotion was the discourse through which the whole neoliberal ideology was spread to the Arab region and to Latin America before, and Eastern Europe. So I spoke. In DC, I realized that what I thought is a project tailored to youth through certain discourses was also spread through other categories. So there is youth empowerment, there are women empowerment, there are issues connected to Christians, to Muslims, and most of them are of the same ideas. So there were different NGOs involved in work with women empowerment than in youth empowerment. So it made me think then, why focus on youth? Is it really a project to win their hearts and minds, or is it more than that? Question arose about the role of the state, of course, and what I was reading about its rolling back. If that is true, so why is then all the lobbies suddenly moved to DC at the peak of the market economy to be around the state? Why would Ronald Bruder, the founder of the Education for Employment Foundation, moved from New York, the hub of finance, to DC, where political power resides, to launch his NGOs? And think how the private sector can help in the war on terror. And why, after around a century of operating from Colorado, with not even a chapter in DC, Junior Achievement in the 80s, with the peak of globalization, started an office in DC, and it was in a room in the State Department itself. And why suddenly, with the rollback of the state, we get all the lobbying in DC? What does that tell us about the role of NGOs, the relation to the state, to capital, to American foreign policy? These questions and many others immediately felt pressing during my research in DC. So mapping out who is who in DC and how they work together made me realize the importance of Amman as a research site. It was in DC that I realized how Amman is important as a city. Amman hosted Junior Achievement after it was Arabized. So they made Junior Achievement and gave it the name of Injaz al-Arab. Injaz is achievement in Arabic. EFE also started the first chapter in Amman. My research in DC also made it easy for me to get access to interviews and people in Amman. If DC access was made easier through me being the good Arab in Amman, having done the research before in DC and name-dropping people I met in DC gave me access to major American NGO directors involved in Amman. I also had met so many Jordanian heads of NGOs in DC through the cultural exchange. They helped me in Amman and were willing to be interviewed. DC at that time was bubbling of all sorts of conferences, workshops, events that brought the NGO heads, private sector, State Department officials together. After all, we met in conferences in DC, we were in the same places, so we must be alike. I wasn't seen as a threat. In Amman, like in DC, the infrastructure of state, civil society, and private sector were working even more closely together to win the hearts and minds of youth and women and children. So in Amman, I realized that the whole idea of civil society as an arena for democracy, a buffer zone between the state and society, needs to be put under scrutiny. The most prominent NGOs were royal NGOs. They got 60% of the fund tailored to youth. Queen Rania was the ambassador of Injaz or Junior Achievement, which gave the NGO much prominence and access to the schools and all other public institutions, and was always in the media. NGOs had to pass through endless scrutiny to be given license to operate. The state had power to close any NGO at any time. But in Amman too, there was a different layer into the relation of the NGOs to the state. This new layer is the supranational, the presence of the American organizations, funding, state control, USAID that needed to be taken into consideration in Amman when we are thinking about NGOs. I, in fact, did my interviews for the curriculum development for the knowledge economy, which in Injaz has been an integral part of in the offices of USAID in Amman and the American Embassy of Amman. The embassy was running the whole show, from funding to conceptualizing to putting the outline of what is to be taught in schools to coordinating with other funders and the World Bank and training teachers from the Ministry of Education on the new curriculum. USAID is the body that started the first chapter of Junior Achievement. It was first hosted by Save the Children US. Being in control of the education reform, suddenly Junior Achievement, or Injaz, became an organic part of the curriculum. USAID funds also helped to kickstart Injaz Al-Arab, which is like the bigger chapter of Injaz that is tailored to all the Arab world. An EFE Amman chapter started with American State Fund, the Middle East Partnership Initiative. In Amman, I also was made aware of the elites' involvement or the business class involvement in the whole process of winning hearts and minds. Businessmen like Fadi Ghandour, who replicated the same idea of Injaz with his own NGO, Ruwad, or Ruwad is leaders, tailored to the poor Ammanis, and that now operated from Amman, Lebanon, Palestine, and maybe other places. There are also the young elite social entrepreneur like Sukarieh Salti, who studied in the Wharton School of Business, and she headed the Injaz Al-Arab, or Junior Achievement Arab branch, for a while. She was very passionate about the project. For her, this was the way forward to make change, to help Arab youth. After all, this was what she learned in school and wanted to apply in the Arab world. Jordanian young elites wanted to help the youth in Jordan. After all, the young queen and young king were about change, and they surrounded themselves with young elites who are supposedly against the old elites. But a closer look clearly showed they are mostly the sons and daughters of the older elite, and some new ones who made their money from the new real estate and tech boom in the city. These added questions to my previous questions I had in DC. First, it is the role of the discourse of youth here. And second, the role of the education system and universities and how normalized ideas about change through NGOs become, or how civil society reduced to NGOs become the only ideas that can lead to change. In Amman, I learned that the young queen and king are part of the Young Arab Leaders Organization, which are the globalized Arab elites who want to work with Arab youth, again, the underclass local youth. So the Young Arab Leaders itself is an NGO. It is a nonprofit organization. They had their headquarters in Dubai. So in order to study the Young Arab Leaders, I had to jump to Dubai. And I wanted to also follow the role of Arab business class. After all, Dubai was the hub of businessmen, and Dubai appointed itself as the ultimate model of a globalized city that rejected politics, a model to be emulated everywhere, and especially in the Arab world. Dubai also funded much of the NGOs operating in different places in the Arab world. In Dubai, some access was made easier because of a network of friends from my American University of Beirut time who worked in the Young Arab Leaders Office or were themselves members of the Young Arab Leaders. But unlike in DC, being the good Arab didn't help me with access to Dubai Young Arab elites. I couldn't fit their membership profile, which is having to be an Arab, a leader, and has at least $1 million in my account. Okay, when trying to access their annual meeting, a British director of the office answered me on the phone to tell me that it's only for members, and I was totally denied access to their first annual meeting. I was lucky enough when Halliburton offered Dayal $1 million and they needed help with proposal writing, which I offered in return for an intern position. The office of YAL was hosted in the Dubai Financial Center itself. So the Young Arab Leaders, as I said, is a nonprofit organization. It was formed in the World Economic Forum to help find jobs for the youth. There is here like the young who are defined, the elites, and the youth, they are like the underclass of young Arabs. It included businessmen, politicians like Hariri of Beirut, Mohammed bin Maktoum, the Sheikh of Dubai, Queen Rania, and other business leaders. Although they claimed to be not interested in politics, the first few events were dialogue with US leaders, dealing with US companies, sponsoring US NGOs all over the Middle East. Why am I telling you the story of my research experience? Basically, because this experience doesn't just show how I did my research, but also highlights some of how the global youth development complex that I talk about in the book works. My research was carried through the pathways and connection that were being constructed in real time by this global complex. So at that time, and this was in 2009, the US was still occupying Iraq. My thinking on this project was a critique of several dominant ideas and issues. First, of course, a direct challenge to the claims of the coalition of willing that what they were doing in the Middle East. It was really amazing how many NGOs involved in this cultural work insisted they were totally separate from and even opposed to US military and political domination and occupation. And yet we could trace how, in fact, they were directly implicated in this process. So, most of the American head of NGOs in DC or in Amman or Dubai, they will immediately tell me we are the good Americans who want to help. We are against Bush and we didn't vote for him. I protested the war. I was in the demonstration. So it's always like, we are not doing politics. We are more of charities through NGOs. We are helping. We want young Arabs to have a future. So second, there is a challenge to many of the claims at the time around the nature of globalization, the disappearance of the state, civil society as totally disconnected. Well, these are ideas that I think now have receded somehow. So it's hard to understand just how dominant they were at the time and how they function to obscure and misdirect attention to the continuing role of powerful central state and capital interests and the interconnectedness of the non-governmental and governmental organization. The third point is the limitation of the focus on the failure of Winning Hearts and Minds campaign, because it only focused on what the State Department was doing and didn't extend to all these other projects or the youth development complex. So all of these points are obviously important on how we think about the work of NGOs, specifically both questioning the degree to which these organizations really are non-governmental, but also asking critical questions about the important role and function that the non-governmental frame has within a wider discursive, ideological, and policy context. Well, for several reasons, I ended up not turning the dissertation directly into a book. I was focused on a range of other concerns, including doing a lot of teaching at universities, like I was adjuncting and in precarious positions, even though they were like good position, but they were like 1-2 years. But what sometimes felt like a failure not to get the book out quickly also turned into a blessing in disguise. For soon, there were other powerful events in the region, most notably the Arab Spring Uprising in 2010. What I soon realized was that many of the organization and ideas and practices that I had been studying in the context of the war on terror and had continued on beyond that time, and were having a presence in the context of the Arab Spring in a number of contradictory ways, framing both how the uprising themselves were understood and explained through the lens of youth and youth unemployment, but also how some of the forces of counter-revolution and reaction were organized and legitimated to contain and control and redirect this uprising. Some of the exact same organization I had been studying, JA, EFE, and especially the young Arab leaders, were centrally involved in this process. So there is, of course, an important story of how we understand youth itself in relation to the Arab Spring Uprising themselves. And quite a lot has now been written about this. And this is something we might want to talk about in discussion. But I realized that there was something bigger, more enduring, of more generalizable relevance here that I was interested in thinking through. And that became the central concern of the Global Idea book. I realized that what I had been tracing empirically and studying theoretically wasn't just about the war on terror. It wasn't just about the challenging claims of the nature of globalization and the rise of civil society and the third sector, NGOs, reduced to NGOs, but more generally, it was about trying to understand how certain ideas, including that of NGOs as arena of change and development, become globally dominant. How do these ideas become dominant? Of course, this was a very particular context shaped by the war on terror and the US state and a range of other powerful actors. But in some ways, this helped to make it more accessible, clearer, to try to trace out processes that in other times and places might be harder to document carefully. How exactly do certain ideas, policies, ideologies, discourses, practices spread around the world? What are the different roles of different actors, including the NGOs in that? So to develop this book, I did a further round of empirical research, which helped add an important temporal dimension to this project so that I could start to look across a period of a decade and more of what was happening in the emergence and development of what I call a global youth development complex across the whole Middle East region. Through this book, several key themes emerge, and I want to highlight 4 themes here, and maybe you have more themes you want to discuss, but these are the 4 themes I thought might be interesting. So the first is the importance of the spatiality of the spread of ideas and the role that key cities and city networks play in the global spread of ideas. Here, the literature on global cities was important, even if it had been primarily developed to focus on the organization of capital rather than ideas around the world, but it was really helpful. So one of the things that this literature does is help to bridge the scales of the micro and the global, the local and global, so that it matters where coffee shops are in certain neighborhoods in Amman or DC, just as it matters how individual, institution, and flow of money and resources connect DC to Amman to Dubai across that vast distances. A second theme is recognizing the importance of different actors and how this shift across time and space. So yes, in the process I was studying, the US state was very much at the heart of the development of this complex. But this does not in any way mean that everything in this complex is reducible to the interests and agendas and actions of the US state. The state gets distracted and moves on to other interests and agenda. But at the same time, all kinds of other actors step in to pursue their own agendas, both international NGOs, national level actors in Jordan and Dubai and other places in the Arab cities in the Arab world, local institutions, and also individuals as well. So in certain times and places, the most important actors driving the development of the youth complex could, for example, be regional entrepreneurs pursuing development projects in the state of Jordan. Also, important here is the plausible deniability of ties with the US state. So the fact that key actors in this complex promote themselves as independent of the US state can at times be helpful to the US state itself, but at other times be operating in a state of relative though never complete autonomy. So the third issue is the materiality of the spread of ideas. So ideas don't just spread on their own or through their own intrinsic compelling nature, but through their links with financial capital, institutional resources, the work of private state and civil sector organization driving these ideas forward. I think one of the most compelling examples of this process is the way in which we find groups reframing their project as youth project, as this is where and how funding streams are accessed, including stretching the definitions of youth to sometimes ridiculous lengths. So adults in their 50s can be reframed as youth to fit in with dominant discursive formation. So like the Young Arab Leaders, they extended the definition of youth. You are eligible to be a young Arab leader if you are under 51. So finally, though, through all of this is the importance of recognizing the ways in which the shape and significance of ideas shift and change across space and time, and the role of NGOs in this. So in the book, I don't pay much attention to direct organized resistance to the work of the Youth Development Complex, though this does exist and of course is important and can be subject for other research and discussion. And I actually covered that in other papers, but my interest was in understanding the work of the complex itself. And here, internal to this work, we find the importance of local adaptation and indigenization, like for example, calling junior achievement إنجاز and make it إنجاز العرب, the achievement of the Arabs. One of the important insights this focus brings, I think, is to force us to recognize that local adaptation and indigenization is not always or inherently about acts of resistance and appropriation, but can be central to the process of selling the product. And it is about the ways in which growing and diverse groups decide to join the complex in pursuit of their own aligned interests and agendas, thereby extending the dominance or hegemony of this complex, even as it shifts over time. Well, all of this, I think, is helpful for enabling us to revisit some of the dominant frames or literature that have been developed or for talking about the global spread of ideas, and thinking through what each might contribute to our understanding of this process, as well as some of their limitation and blind spots. I think for myself, I'm struck by how vehemently the literature on cultural imperialism, for example, has been scorned, ignored, rejected in recent years in much academic discussion, dismissed as outdated, simplistic, and limited. I certainly don't see my work as being a straightforward return to the older literature on cultural imperialism. But I do see it as an argument for the continued relevance and indeed importance of cultural imperialism as a vital imperative frame, along with several other conceptual framework as well, all of which I detailed in the last chapter of the book. So all of this has implication, of course, for how we think about NGOs, about international relations, and whether we are working in NGOs, working with NGOs, or studying NGOs as students and researchers. And this is something that I would be interested in hearing from all of you who have interest in NGOs. To put this last set of points in more direct, blunt language, this is a call for the importance of following the money when we look at the work of NGOs, but more than this, to follow the institutional network, to trace out the personal links, not just of the leaders at the top of this organization, but frontline staff as well, who often tend to shift quite rapidly from one organization to the next and between the state, private, and NGO sector. And crucially, to recognize the importance of an historical as well as global or international perspective, looking back in time and out across national borders to try to piece together an informed and grounded picture of the work that any single NGO is engaged in doing. So whether in the global youth development complex that I sketch out in the book or in other field of endeavor. So I will stop here and I will look for the conversation. Hello.
Thanks, Mayssoun. I'm sure there are plenty of questions. Yes. Thank you very much. I'm sure there are going to be plenty of questions and people will start raising their hands. I'll give you one that someone passed along to me who has a connectivity issue, couldn't make it. She was wondering what your perspective is about the youth. What contributions or what effects did the Arab youth have in themselves in these cities?
Yeah, well, yes, I think, to talk about, so it's like the agency of youth themselves. This is what is the question about, kind of?
Well, yes, the agency, if they have agency, how's that?
Yeah, of course they do have agency, but there is no counter project to what was going on. Well, first of all, when we are talking about the Arab world, what happened with the Arab Spring, for example. Like when people took to the street, there was so much repression. So that we have dictatorship and the state control is very strong. So you have to always take that into consideration when you are thinking about, the agency or what young people can do. there is also, like, you know, during the Arab Spring, it wasn't only like each state individually suppressing its own people. There was also the counter-revolution with so much Gulf money, because the Gulf states were really worried about, well, if these people achieve democracy, then there might be some inspiration for our own, right, people. So there was so much money being poured from Emirates and Saudi Arabia, basically, to counter the Arab Spring and to help the dictators stay in power. And of course, you know, there are other actors in different states differently. Like in Syria, it was Russia. In Egypt, it was US. So you have like different other international players. This is how you start to think, like from the small to the bigger and so on. Okay, so this is it. But it doesn't mean there were so many. Okay, when we think about, you know, I don't think the situation is only about Arab youth, but it is about the whole world in general. We are living in similar situation. We have specificities in here. Most of the work of the activists in the past 20, 30 years have been through NGOs, because we have also the total dismantling of all the big ideas of nationalism, and you have the Islamists who don't really have these divisions. So most of the activists or the leftists are working within NGOs, right? So most of the activism or the agencies have been through NGOs or through other political actors. But if you want to think about the agencies in terms of countering the dominant ideas, I think I detailed that in one of the papers I wrote about. There were more of people realizing that after 20 years of these talks that, you know, if you have ideas, you can have a place in the market, that this is not true. So they started to think about what is going on here and what is the role of that, and so on and so forth. So yeah, they do have agency, the young Arabs as everywhere, but there are so many limitations at the moment. I'm not sure how, or, you know, there are different punches to the hegemonic discourses. Different punches might lead at the end to something that is bigger. So they were participated a lot in the Arab Spring, along with labor movements and other political parties. But as I said, there was so much counter-revolution going on and so much dictatorship and suppression. So it failed for a while. It seems there is a movement going on now. Sorry, I'm rambling. It's 10:30 and it's 11 in Lebanon. Yeah, it is. So the problem is the whole idea of the book, or how I think about youth, it's not only about youth themselves. So the agency of the whole community, how they work together with labor movement, how they work together with political parties, if there are any, how they work together with women's movement, how they work together with other different issues. So once we just like start to look only from the lens of youth, it becomes really problematic, because it is constructed. Youth is constructed. Who is spreading the discourse of youth, and in whose interest? Why youth? Because I said at the beginning of the talk that whatever ideas they are tailoring to young people, suddenly you find them in women NGOs, in other places. So what does that mean? So do I talk only about the agency of young people, or do I talk about some sort of a counter-hegemonic movement that includes all these groups, social groups? Yeah. Sorry.
No, that's very helpful. And I know that we've got a lot of people from my class, and we have people also from other groups interested in non-governmental organizations. So it's good to make the connection. lot of the questions are very elaborate. I'm not sure how, if you want me to, I think what I can do is try and go through and pull some things together. But Mark, if you want to call on some people while I'm doing that and seeing if I can synthesize a few of these, because there's some great questions in here. Would that work? Kind of team tag it here a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just gonna read out loud. Kendall Furman, I would also love to know if you could elaborate on any findings from your research that surprised you or challenged your initial assumptions. So the other questions seem to be really great syntheses, and so Jane and I are gonna have a good task of trying to come up with some main themes here.
Yeah.
What was
And then I'll call,
was
I see some hands up too. But did anything surprise you in your work?
Yeah, well, all what my talk was all surprises. So you go, and I was focused on like my whole presentation was about the surprises I found. So I went and I just thought I'm just going to focus on the State Department. I just wanted to talk to officials in the State Department, and suddenly I found myself in a whole different range of organization and all what I've learned in the books when I was studying my PhD about like the rollback of the state. There is no state, the power of state is ruining, we have globalization. Suddenly I was like, what the heck? Like, what does that mean? Like, if this was true, then New York should be the center for everything. So why is everybody moving to DC to start their NGOs? And why a businessman like Ronald Bruder needed to come to DC to talk to official, he said, in the CIA and State Department, and also like talk to Brookings and the World Bank. At that time, we're starting the Wilkinson Center for Youth, Middle East Youth. So it was like, okay, I was really shocked, honestly, because like when you are doing a PhD, you have like 3 years of just reading, and all the readings were focused on the market economy and how the state vanished and so on. And suddenly I found myself that state is becoming even more prominent, even though we have like these different NGOs. Yes, it rolled back from certain services. So yes, it rolled back from the health sector, from the education sector, but actually it didn't roll back when it comes to hegemonic ideas, when it comes to interest, when it comes to international relation, when it comes to foreign policy and so on. It was still very present. So this was like, okay, the first shock for me. and DC by itself was really shocked. The spatiality of how Dupont Circle, K Street hosted all of these NGOs and how they work together and how informal the whole talks become. So it becomes like, and I had so much admiration for the people who I wanted to hate them, but I couldn't because they were really passionate about what they were doing. So like you talk to someone and they are telling you about democracy promotion and how it's important and so on. And I want to tell him, like, why do you want to spread democracy in the Middle East? And then you see how passionate they are. And then you start to reflect that we are all products of certain forms of knowledge production, of hegemonic ideas. And that if we want to challenge or to change, we have also to accept or to understand, to empathize, like where we are all coming from, right? We are all made by these hegemonic ideas. And we think that, like Soraya Salti, for example, in Jordan, I loved her. She was like hardcore market economy. This is how things should work. You just open the market, teach people how to create ideas, and there will be jobs for everyone. Of course, this is not true, because entrepreneurship is an ideology. It is not about finding jobs for the young people. It's spreading the ideology of the market, of entrepreneurship. Yeah, I'm not against entrepreneurship, but you know, you don't preach entrepreneurship for the poor people. At the same time, you are opening the market for huge businesses. You can't compete. And, but she was so passionate about it. And this is the way the world, this is the way she thinks the world should be. And she really wanted to change. So this was my surprise too, that like, you know, there are so many people that I don't agree with, but I learned to be tolerant about their ideas more, where they are coming from, because I was also a product of that ideology before starting to do my ethnographic research, right? So like mapping out this. What are the surprises? Yeah, I was surprised how well connected I am. They say like the world is small, but I think we are all elites working together. In a way, it's a sad word because I end up like wherever I go is like these elite circles, I know someone, because I mean, I went to the elite schools in Lebanon and went to American University of Beirut, and then I went to elite school in the US. So is it a small word or is it like sad word because all the elites are so well connected? And also my big surprise was how easy it is to get access to powerful people. So because I was studying up also, and you have all these ideas about, you know, the poor are waiting for us to study them and they have no work. The rich people and the powerful people are so busy, they don't have time for us. It's hard to access them. And, you know, all these ideas we have. And suddenly all these like become illusions. It's are like myths in our heads. First of all, the poor people might be busier than the businessmen and so on, because they don't have anyone to work for them. So this idea that there all will be, and we can't get access, there are 3 million ways we can get access to elites, and you just need to be passionate and feisty, which I was, and I could get access to really up to to the Sheikh of Dubai and his ministers and Queen Rania and whatever. I just like, I was perseverant and really passionate. So this was like really surprising for me. What else? Surprises. Yeah. Yeah, I found so many of my friends working in these NGOs too. So, I mean, yes, the whole process of working through the research was all surprises, like, okay, at different levels that I detailed in the talk. Yeah.
So we've Mark and I have been trying to pull things together, and you also have a few hands up, but I think if we, so you've talked about youth and youth working with grassroots organizations and youth working with labor and women's groups and other things, and where youth have had power and where they haven't had power. You've talked a bit about the Arab Spring a bit more, although I think some people might want you to return to that. But one thing that both Mark and I have noticed that keeps coming up in the questions is are these cities, Amman and Dubai, are they unique in the Arab world? Do you think if you had done research with other Arab cities that you might have found anything different, or would it be the same? And then you have you also, so that would be one set of questions. And then with regards to the network issue, the idea of networks among cities in the world, and you spoke quite clearly previously about how complex the networks were, governmental, non-governmental, private, public, and so on and so forth. But is one system more important than another? That this, like the system of ideas or the system of MOUs and trade agreements, or do they have to go together? What's your view on that? And then also with regard to cultural imperialism, because as you said, you don't, remains a vital frame. Is cultural imperialism necessary? And is there, if it's not, I mean, what's happening, what happens, what is the resistance to it, I guess I'm trying to summarize.
Yeah.
And now some more questions are coming in, but I'll stop there.
So I lost track. So the first part of the question is like if there are different Arab cities that are as prominent. Okay, so yeah, of course, because I was following you. So these were the cities that were important for, for me. If you want to follow other cities, so when it comes, for example, youth and women Amman would be the same. I would still start with DC because like at that point, because it is really important. Ideas originate somewhere. And, you know, the US is the leader of the global market economy. It's the leader of global capitalism at the moment. Yes, maybe it shifts in a bit and it becomes China, so we can focus on like cities change, right? Because it's uneven development and it shifts. So yeah, I would start with DC, but Dubai, yes, because Dubai has been working or appointed itself as leader in the Arab world when it comes to the spread of ideas. And they have like media, they are pouring so much money and so on. Now there is a competition with Saudi Arabia. So before, when I was doing my research, Saudi Arabia was not at all in the picture. If you follow now what is going on in Saudi Arabia, MBS and MBZ are in are somehow like racing about who is going to take control. So I like in a bit, I think when it comes to technology, to smart cities, to all these things, if you are working on that, so I think you have to do research in Saudi Arabia. When it comes to and Saudi is really interesting to follow because they are emulating, they are putting so much more money and they are fighting for hegemony over with UAE over other Arab states. So this is really interesting to see how it unfolds. Okay, so do I change the cities? Yes, it depends on the topic, but also I think starting from where the ideas are starting is really important. For me, it was DC at that time. Maybe if you are having different ideas, might be different cities. So this is the beauty of global cities. So depending on if you are following money, Amman definitely won't be. It's not a global financial city. It is more of a city that, you know, gained its prominence because of the geostrategic interest of Jordan, because it was at that time, like, you know, Iraq, and most of the training for Iraqis used to happen in Amman, and also because of like proximity with Palestine. It's not a financial city. If I was studying financial cities, I would definitely not include Amman. Dubai maybe, but I would include like then Riyadh, something else, right? If I am interested in conflict resolution, then I would also have to shift the cities. So see, you have to always think about what is it you are studying and then follow. Follow the money. And so this is in response to your question about the cities. I lost track. The second part of the question was
Networks. So were non-economic networks like ideas, how do they spread, and is that system more important than the economic, the MOUs and those types of network agreements that you talked about?
the network and the ideas, but they are totally connected, right? I'm not sure I can separate ideas from money. Like, let's give you an example. Let's say now I have a great idea myself, and then it's really important, or you have great ideas about, I don't know, like about ecology, or about, like, let's say with youth and jobs. You have a great idea, and then how can you push it without having access to money, having access to institutions, having access? I don't think they are separated. And this is what we really need to, or what I try to argue, that we really need to follow the money also, and how ideas get pushed. These are not the only ideas, because there are ideas like, for example, from the axis of resistance that were pushed through other cities like Baghdad and like Hezbollah in Lebanon, Baghdad. So this can be another constellation of cities, right? But when it comes to global capitalism, these are still connected to global capitalism. They have different ideologies. So I cannot separate ideas from infrastructure, from network, from institutions, from all these things. It's hard to. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess just again summarizing, pulling together from a bunch of different questions. You, like I said, you mentioned cultural imperialism as a vital frame, but is it necessary? I mean, is it at this point with regards to how the systems are working, and what about pushback against cultural imperialism?
Yeah, I think, like, this is what I argue, that, there is so much pushback against it. I think it's still a useful frame, a starting point, if you want to call it, because you can start to think how dominant ideas travel. So once you have like so much money, so much network, so much effort is being put to spread certain ideas, so there is power, right? And this is like a dominant culture trying to, spread all over the world. So this is the idea of cultural imperialism. But of course, we are in a different stage of capitalism. Like, this is really the idea of like the US as the only hegemonic state that is fabricating all these ideas, and then we are at the receiving end. The world doesn't hold truth at all, because, as I said in the presentation and in the book, there are all these other groups that have the same interest in global capitalism, leader of the global capitalism, who want the same ideas, from the people, from the Queen Rania and King Abdullah to Dubai leaders, to all business Arab leaders in the Arab world, or even sometimes to just social entrepreneurs. So do I thinking about cultural imperialism in the old way is so limiting and can be so destructive, because then it becomes like about us and them is like the US or China or whatever, one state, right? And this is not the case here at all. It can be a starting point. It has to be joined with so many other frames in order to trace how hegemonic ideas are formed and in whose interest. And the interest is not anymore centered around national borders.
Well, thank you. I'll continue to read through these and see if I can summarize. You can see hands up, can't you, Mayssoun? Can you see
Yes.
hand?
Liam,
If you want to go ahead and call on.
Yeah, there's Liam Pierce and Gabriel Gonzalez. Yeah.
Hello. I wanted to ask you a question about what you think China's role is in all of this, and what influence and spread of like Chinese ideas and thoughts do you think is happening in the global cities in your book?
Okay, sorry. This is a really interesting question, because yes, China is not is not yet a prominent player in this constellation. But in the past 2 years, I started to see how China has started to put so much interest in culture and cultural diplomacy. So, like, for example, they are sending so many young people to study Arabic in the Arab world and to learn about the Arab world and the culture. They have some sort of fellowships like the State Department fellowships, and they train. I'm getting so many interested PhD students. Somebody is, yeah. So many of the PhD students are sent as delegation from the Chinese state to study certain issues in the Arab world and other places in the Arab world, also following the Chinese and the state interest. They are having cultural attaches in Lebanon, for example, that are very, very, very active now. But I don't think China is yet a prominent player in this sense. Like, you know, there is a shift, but it's not yet materialized. So this is what when I talk about cultural imperialism, there is a problem of just focusing on one. I don't believe in West-East. I don't believe in like US versus, I don't believe in all these things. We have to trace, we have to keep like looking, keep analyzing, keep checking the new facts that are going, keep also thinking about the economy and what is going on with the economy, who is becoming the leader, who is putting so much money here, there, and so on. So yeah, I'm not sure if I answered your question. It's still burgeoning, but it's not yet so much important. But you should follow, because I am telling you, I'm witnessing so much of what happened before with the Cold War. The US is going on now with China. There is Gabriel Gonzalez, or
Yes. Hi. Let me, there we go.
hi, yes.
Hi. So, I've got a question related to what you said throughout the Zoom call right now. I mean, in your conversation, you mentioned that at the beginning of the 21st century, cultural politics were very tied to ideas of globalization and neoliberalism. You gave us insights into your personal and unique experiences inside of many of the institutions working towards influencing global cultural politics. Would you describe these goals to be like, were the ideals of globalism and neoliberalism undermined and used to justify pushing certain government politics, or were the politics influenced by globalism and neoliberalism?
Yeah. Again, this is the same like idea of like I answered the previous question. It doesn't have to be either or. I mean, you have to read like things like, you know, playing a piano. You have to read them contrapuntally, right? So at this, you read them at the same level, and then you see power relation between them. But it doesn't have to be like, oh, ideas. It's like modernity. Does the modernity start in the West and then was introduced to the East? There were players in the Middle East who are as important, or in India or whatever, or whatever in the world, Latin America, who were as interested, as invested in the ideas of what we call modernity as much as the Europeans, right? So do we just like, if we start saying, okay, there is no cause effect in social science, or there is no like one-way stream. You have to read it like in so many complicated way, and you have to follow so many actors in order to understand. Otherwise it becomes, you know, the very simplistic international relation frame, how we think about the world. And it doesn't hold much, especially these days with all, you know, the different players and the borders or the nation state centrism, or is challenged, right? So do we still think about the state as, you know, it was never the case, but we used to think about state as separate entities that we can analyze what is going on in here. And then you have like different international players, and these international players act with a state. It doesn't work at all at all. It didn't work before, but it doesn't even work now more, right? Because
So you would
yes,
say it has more to do with individual actors, right?
all
And
individual, institutional, yes. Sometimes, like, you know, it doesn't, like, for example, if you want to think about in jazz, junior achievement. A junior achievement, for example, in the UK, it was just like a businessman who went to the US and got introduced to the idea of junior achievement, and he really loved it. And he came to the US, to UK, and he called it a youth enterprise, just like that. But it's the same exact idea of junior achievement. Okay, there was no power relations here or anything. Yes, of course, he has interest in spreading these ideas because, you know, because of his business, he believed in them, all these things. But it was one individual who is not connected to the state, who is just a businessman. When it comes to the Arab world, it was totally different because you have all these circle of ideas. And it was at a time when you have like the Bush administration, what at that time, like, you know, reinventing the ideas of imperialism. That was like they want to act as an empire, but also we have to put that under scrutiny, right? The new American century, if you want to think about it. Thank you. Sanina Kulkarni.
Anjana, yeah, hi.
Yeah.
Hi, Dr. Sukarieh. Thank you so much for educating us on the influence that the Arab Spring has had on Arab youth overall. And my question is, through your research, what did you notice or find out about Western youth and how they're perceiving the role and impact of Arab youth following the Arab Spring?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Again, I think, what is Western youth? What is Arab youth, right? So in the West, I mean, like, what is the West? There are so many youth that are like, you know, the youth in the West who are working with labor movement. They are ones who are working with climate change. That are ones who are working with the state. That are ones who are working with. So the whole idea of youth itself can cover more than it reveals. So I'm not sure I can think about Western youth, Arab youth. Again, who are the Arab youth? So Arab youth, like for example, in Jordan, are the poorer young people that are being managed by the young who call themselves young because they define themselves and they are known, the business elite, the political elite. So it's really hard to answer a question when it is about Western youth and Arab youth because
In the way that they perceive global radicalism as you've written in your book.
yeah, but then, you know, global radicalism, there are young people in the Arab world who are anti-radical and there are young people in the West who were so for the Arab Spring because they have the same ideas. So it's like the idea of internationalism. When you have people who work for the same concepts, they have the same ideas about social justice, they are interested in change in the similar ways. So they connect, they network. And there were so many of them who connected, like so many of youth organization in Europe and the US who connected with organization of youth in the Arab world during the Arab Spring because they have the same ideas about social justice. But there were so many, for example, young people in the Arab world who were anti-Arab Spring because they are invested or they have interest with the political elites and with the status quo. So for example, the organization I talk about, Young Arab Leaders, were terrified of the Arab Spring They were really terrified. And there is a clip of one of their leaders who was saying, like, we are really in danger. This is terrifying, and we need to act and act quickly. Otherwise, all our interest, what we've built in the past 20 years, will go in scramble. And he was really like talking with this passion. So do I consider him Arab youth the same one as the ones who were struggling in Tahrir Square against the dictators? No, he's not. So you see, like, I don't have a category called Western youth, and I don't have a category called Arab youth. These categories are constructed for certain reasons, and our role as academic or as global citizens of the world or concerned citizens is to try to understand what are the roles of these categories and why we are adopting them ourselves. Is that clear? So
Yes,
you can think about what is, yeah. Sorry.
thank you so much. Yes, that's clear. That's very clear.
Yeah, it's always better to think about ideas that connect people and principles and passion than identity, because it becomes like about identity politics, and it is a really,
Very subjective.
it's dangerous also, and it is not good for, I mean, I connect with so many like white people, if you want, because it's all about race and whatever, white male, then I connect with brown woman when it comes to ideas and so on and so forth. So this identity politics is really dangerous, and we need to start thinking about people of who they are in the world, what they represent, and what they do in the world, instead of like labeling them as Western youth, whatever youth, these things. Yes?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. There is Natalia Perez.
Hi, first I want to say thank you for speaking to us today. But my question is, what is like the interest or like the agenda of the government of Amman in promoting the youth development complex?
Yeah, great. This is, of course. So they are promoting a youth development complex. Why? So a little bit of history. So it's the young king and the government of Amman, or the monarchy, doesn't have so much support from most of the people in Jordan. I'm not sure if you know a bit of the history, but there is a division between the Transjordanians and the Palestinians who came in 48 and 67, and they form most of the population. And these tend to be the elites plus the people in the camps. And you have the Transjordanian who got the support, who supported the king, because the king was always giving them jobs and security. So the Transjordanians supported the king because of, if you want, the public sector. So they worked in the schools, like teachers, nurses, they have public education, they were in the army, they are in the army, and all of the public sector. Fine. So you get the new king, and with the new king, you have the privatization. Okay, the privatization will make the king totally lose the support of the Transjordanian, who were like very important to the stability of the monarchy. Okay, what do you do then? you are coming with privatization, like, dwindling the public sector. The most affected will be the constituency of the monarchy. So they needed to create certain discourses to win the hearts and minds. So it's not like only the US that winning heart and mind of Muslim youth. There is the Jordanian monarchy wanted to win the hearts and minds or spread certain hegemonic ideas through which they can sell the market economy without losing the support of the Transjordanian, because otherwise they can be ousted, right? There can be a revolution against them. So in this sense, they poured so much money with the help of USAID, of course, like, in order to position the king and the queen as the people who are bringing change to the kingdom. So, and who doesn't like change, right? And youth is all about change, right? Youth change is against the old, is against the previous, right? It's against the whatever came before, and what came before was like, since the 80s was not really great for the Jordanian. They had like the bread riots against privatization, against the lifting of subsidies of bread. So how do you sell a king and queen that are coming to privatize and to the masses of Transjordanian who are the supporters of the monarchy without losing that support? You have to to spread, you have to do PR. And the Youth Development Complex or change and the young queen, young king, all of this was part of this PR campaign to model ideas, right? So to spread certain ideologies that can confuse people about what is going on, right? Did I answer you?
Yes, thank you for the clarification.
Okay. Any other
So
questions?
and that kind of tied to some questions, some other questions. What you just said kind of answered some other questions about, because you were saying cultural imperialism is not just unidirectional. And so what you're saying here is that Jordan's participation, it wasn't so much that Jordan had its own idea that countered that of Washington's, it's more that Jordan had its own agenda, and that
Of course.
and that Washington's idea, so that the cultural imperialism model is multi-directional, relates to multiple agendas and multiple things. Another question related to the networks that you talk about, the global networks, is what were their effects on grassroots movements, if you know, and their effects on local communities? What, in other words, because you focus on these urban centers and
Yeah.
their power networks.
Yeah, this is a really important question, because I wanted to do like cities and what you call them, the local, the cities and the hinterland, if you want to call it.
And grassroots also.
Yeah, the grassroots. Well, okay, again, like, what is grassroots? Grassroots, in somehow, like in most of these places, like you are grassroots, but you get fund from USAID. You are grassroots, but you get fund from. So there is a question about who constitute the grassroots here. Most of these ideas are so hegemonic to an extent that even after the Arab Spring, people fell into, like, we want democracy. So, right? So, and it's like, democracy promotion was so important that all what people wanted was democracy, even though they were saying it's bread and so on and so forth. But when they started to change the constitution, whether in Tunisia or whether in Egypt, it was all about like democracy voting. We want to vote. We want democracy. We want even in Baghdad too, like in the middle of the war, they took to the street and they asked for elections, right? So it's not the end of the war. It is not we want to eat, we want a better, regain the city. It was like, we want elections. So these ideas, and by the way, they aren't only hegemonic or haven't been hegemonic only in the Arab world. If you look around, it's hard. Now we started to have so many challenges of these ideas. Like, humanity is stuck somewhere, and there is not a new way of thinking or new ideology, if you want to call it, or a new frame that, that is trying to challenge holistically the market economy. So, so it's hard. So this is when it comes to grassroots, because grassroots also is funded. It's like some kind of NGOs that are called grassroots, because there was a challenge to NGOs. So they started to say, oh, we are grassroots. There is so much criticism about that. The relation between the cities and the hinterland is really important, because for the first time in the history of Jordan, for example, you get NGOs operating in the, like if you look in the villages, in the communities outside of Amman. And the funny thing is that Amman or the monarchy started a ministry of local community, development of local communities. So you have a state that is called Jordan, but then they decided that Amman is the center and they want to develop the local communities. So, okay, so how did they do that? They started to bring like, let's take Injaz as an example, it will be clearer. So Injaz started in Amman, and it has the headquarters of in Amman. And it's also like in the Queen Rania court, their office. So through the Ministry of Local Development, Local Communities Development, so these are the local communities and we are the global in Amman. So they started to bring, to have chapters of Injaz throughout all this even smaller communities all over Jordan. And they bring them all the time to Amman, whether for job fairs, whether for training, whether for everything. So Amman becomes the center, like DC for Amman. Amman becomes the center for the hinterland, where they are trying to spread the ideas of globalization to the tribal, even small tribal communities all over, because Injaz was introduced in the national curriculum. So everybody in Jordan will know about Injaz because it is in the books, it's in the curriculum they study in the national curriculum. Well, unless you go to the elite school like international baccalaureate or, the American schools in Amman, you don't have to know about Injaz. You know about Injaz because you are asked to volunteer with them to teach the younger people. So this is like kind of how they are related. Amman becomes suddenly the representative of the global, and instead of having like, this is what I was trying to say about the state-centric analysis. It doesn't work because here they have like, okay, these are the local communities and we are the global in Amman, right? So it's much more, it's very complicated and very interesting to study if you are doing if you want to do MA or your BA dissertation thesis, it's a great topic.
Well, I don't know about Mark, but I think that pulls together most of I mean, I know that I didn't touch all of the details on all of your questions, but pulling together in general, or I heard Dr. Sukarieh already cover it. Mark, is there anything you wanted to ask or that you spot?
And this is just really, I'm seeing some parallels between the NGOization of activism and the work that I do in Haiti, for example, and the framing of the crisis in the media. shapes the possibilities of action and forecloses other possibilities.
Yeah.
I'm just really, really excited that you're doing the work that you're doing. I can see in your, feel in your conversation just how much investment that you've given to this project over the years. And it's, more than just a book, to you, and that's great to see as well.
Yes, thank you. I just want to apologize. I came to Lebanon and I didn't realize that I'm 2 hours even like behind ahead of London. So it was 10:30 my time. And I feel like I was rambling all over and a bit like, I don't know. So I apologize if I wasn't making myself clear. It's like 12 o'clock. Yes. But I
Well,
really
I think
enjoyed
we're all
Yeah.
we're all very grateful that you were willing to do that, despite the fact that when we arranged this, you were all the way over in London. So
Yeah, it's fine. It's
Thank
as I
you.
said, this is like I like conversations. I like talking to students. I'm not a book talker. I don't like the performance of like going to universities to promote. This is more of like concern for all of us and students, and it's better this way. And thank you for, I hope you don't regret it after like 10:30 at night. Yes.
I'm gonna put a little note in the chat and then I'll read it out loud. So the Real Talk and Big Ideas series continues next Tuesday, April 9th, from 2 to 3:30 Central Daylight Savings Time, with Elizabeth Buggood and Christopher Pallas discussing Beyond the Boomerang. It's rethink of the classic Kekensee boomerang in their Activists Beyond Borders. So to register, there's a link in the chat. Go nau.edu/Beyond the Boomerang, and our series concludes Monday, April 22nd, noon to 1:30 Central Time, with Jacqueline Villarrubia Mendoza and Roberto Velez discussing coloniality, disasters, and the challenges of mutual aid. So go to nau.edu/self-help in Puerto Rico. And next year we're planning the series tomorrow, actually. And the theme for next year will be people on the move. So various aspects of migration, asylum, immigration, undocumented folks, and what is the NGO or private response to today's issues of migration. So before we all scatter, wanted to maybe you can even show your face and say thank you. It's great to see people when they wave goodbye. Yeah, thank you all for and specifically Dr. Sukarieh, thank you for coming such a late time in the day for you. So we appreciate it.
No, thank you so much. It was real pleasure, great conversation, and young people are always very inspiring because they have questions. Adults start to posture.
Lots and lots of questions. So thank you again.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so very much, and good
Thank
luck
you so
for
much.
the rest of the semester.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.